Hello and welcome to the Klassiki podcast. I'm your host, Sam Goff. Klassiki is your window into the world of Eastern European film. Subscribers gain access to our library of classic and contemporary films, as well as access to filmmaker interviews, video introductions, program notes, and much more. You can sign up for a free trial today at klassiki.online. And if you enjoy this show, then don't forget to subscribe in your podcast app, and please leave us a review and a 5-star rating. Thank you. In this episode, I'm going to be dipping back into the ever-expanding archive of writing on the Klassiki Journal, which you can find at klassiki.online/journal. Today is the 70th birthday of one of the true greats, Béla Tarr, Hungary's maestro of slow cinema melancholy. So, to mark the occasion, I'll be reading today from our companion to the life and times of this icon of Eastern European film. From his early days as a schoolboy anarchist to his position as a grandee of world cinema. Make sure to check out the links in the show description to find the original essay, to watch Tarr's masterpiece Werkmeister Harmonies on Klassiki, and to explore our full collection of titles from Hungary. Few filmmakers are as distinctive as Béla Tarr. A handful of seconds of footage would be enough for most cinephiles to recognise the man behind the camera. From his fifth feature film, Damnation, onwards, the Hungarian maestro has created a cinematic universe of unique dimensions. Populated by drunks, visionaries, criminals and lunatics, his films unfold in languorous long takes. The black and white cinematography is exquisite, but it captures a world on the verge of devastation. One in which it is always raining or blowing a gale. The great critic Jonathan Rosenbaum called him a despiritualized Tarkovsky. And while his name has become shorthand for bleakness on film, there's great humour and beauty in his compositions, which draw on the earthy visions of the Dutch masters, as well as the genre conventions of American popular cinema. As Tarr turns 70, and with a full retrospective of his work having swept across the UK last year, now is as good a time as any to revisit his peripatetic career, one defined by frustration as much as triumph, and to understand how what the man himself sarcastically refers to as brand tar came to be. In the words of the critic Rose McLaren, this is an essentially disproportionate worldview that pits paradox against conventional logic, taste, or taxonomy. It proves that beauty can inhere in something as simple as wood grain, and it suggests different ways in which to conceive of, even perhaps accept, cruelty and boredom. Not that Tarr himself, who is notoriously loath to intellectualize his own work, would put it that way. None of it is meditational, he told IndieWire back in 2012. You have to hold everything in your hands. Filmmaking is horrible work. You're always fighting with the weather, the time, the money situation. When you're on set, you have no time for any intellectual effort. You just have to go ahead. Or, in the slightly more conciliatory terms of an interview conducted just last year, our world is what it is, but we're here to make it better. Béla Tarr was raised in Budapest in a theatrical family. His father designed sets and scenery, and his mother was a line prompter. At 14, he was gifted a hand-cranked quartz 8mm film camera. At 16, he produced a kind of guerrilla documentary, now lost, about a group of Roma workers writing to Hungarian General Secretary János Kadar to request permission to travel abroad. This film won prizes at amateur festivals in Hungary, and it might have stood the young Tarr in good artistic stead, had he not taken it upon himself to hire a projector to screen the film at workers' hostels around the country without official permission. For this act of impudence, Tarr received his first reprimand from the authorities, who let him know that he could forget any plans to attend university within Hungary. Tarr's willfulness here was of a piece with what he calls his far leftist anarchist views as a young man. He's claimed that he never carried a school bag during his final years of high school, since Mao's Bible in my pocket was more than enough for me. Although he was already a devotee of the cinema of Miklos Jancsó, whose sinuous long takes are a clear influence on Tarr's own work, he planned to study philosophy rather than filmmaking. When that plan was frustrated, he went to work on the Orbiter shipyards for several years. It was in this period that Tarr developed what he termed the social cinema of his first features, under the influence of the cinema verite stylings of the so-called Budapest school of non-fiction filmmaking. Emerging from the small experimental Béla Tarr studios, this quasi-underground tendency made films on minuscule budgets with amateur equipment and non-professional casts. Their aim was to tackle social issues ignored in more mainstream cinema. Tarr's debut feature from 1979, Family Nest, concerns the housing crisis afflicting working-class urban families. Shot in just 5 days, when the director was only 22 years old, the film won awards at the Mannheim Festival in West Germany. Following this unexpected international acclaim, the Hungarian authorities relented and allowed Tarr to enroll at the Hungarian School of Theatrical and Cinematic Arts. While still a student, he produced 2 more features with Balázs Studios, The Outsider and The Prefab People, both from 1982, which continue his preoccupation with the marginalized and downtrodden. The Outsider stars András Zábor as a depressed hospital worker and part-time musician circling the drain of alcoholism and sexual abandon, while Prefab People offers a critique of consumerism among the proletariat, with its portrait of a young family going off the rails. Watching this trilogy of early films from the vantage points of Tarr's later canonization can be disorienting. They bear very little resemblance to the stately, monochrome visions of his mature career. But their black humour and sense of earthy inhabitation are traits that recur throughout his oeuvre. In a fascinating extended interview with a Hungarian YouTuber that was released in 2023, Tarr says of these early films, "When you're young, you think that there are only social problems, and that when they're solved, there will be bliss. But then you get older and realize that these problems are not the ontological ones." In the early 1980s, Tarr began to look for new formal approaches to match his deepening philosophical concerns. Along with a handful of other Balázs Studios comrades, like Jogi Feyer, András Jeles, and Gábor Bódi, he established Társulás, a studio within a studio that had next to no money, but allowed plenty of scope for experimentation. After a 1982 adaptation of Macbeth for Hungarian television that played out in a single long take, Tarr produced perhaps his most idiosyncratic feature, Autumn Almanac, a single location chamber drama about the tensions between a quintet of troubled residents. Autumn Almanac recalls the melodramatic artificiality of Rainer Werner Fassbinder and the jerkily rhythmic editing of the French New Wave, all oblique angles and lurid lighting cues. While Tarr was still searching for the right stylistic approach to match his increasingly mordant worldview, the pieces of his mature career were now falling into place around him. Since The Outsider, he had been working with the editor Agnes Chronicki, who would later become his wife and most intimate collaborator, credited as co-director on his final 4 features. Autumn Almanac featured the first score by Mihály Víg, who from that point on was a permanent fixture in the Tarr universe, and who would go on to play the menacing lead in Satan Tango. When the novelist Laszlo Krasznahorkai was brought into the fold as screenwriter for his next feature, Damnation, in 1988, the central quartet that would define the Tarr house style for the rest of his career was complete. Before then, however, Tarr had to face what he has since called the darkest period of my life. In the space of 12 months, Társulás Studios turned out 3 radical features: Tarr's Autumn Almanac, András Jeles's Dream Brigade, and Gábor Bódi's The Dog's Night Song, all 3 of which pushed the envelope too far for the authorities' liking. In Tarr's words, Társulás was executed and its filmmakers disbanded. Before the studio was shut down, Tarr and Krasznahorkai had already received approval to proceed with their adaptation of Krasznahorkai's debut novel, Satan Tango. But now that project was left floundering. Desperate to pull his friend out of a spiralling depression, Krasznahorkai suggested that they distract themselves by working together on the script that would become Damnation, a brooding blend of genre elements, noir, western, even musical. Here at last we witness the first full bloom of the now instantly recognisable Tarr brand. Harshly lit black and white cinematography, exhaustingly long takes realised through ingenious camera choreography, visions of a provincial but somehow timeless Hungary populated by the doomed remnants of a collapsing social order. Knowing better than to go to the state film body for approval, Tarr and Krasznahorkai instead cobbled together the money for the shoot from an advertising studio and untapped restoration funds from the National Archive. The result, in Tarr's eyes, was Hungary's first independent film. When representatives of the Berlin Film Festival asked to screen it at the 1989 edition of the festival, the Hungarian authorities were thrown for a loop. They didn't even know the film existed. Damnation was a hit, and Tarr and Chojnicki were offered the chance to move to West Germany. As state communism crumbled in Hungary and across Eastern Europe, the pair used this newfound freedom to lay the foundations for their next project, one that would go on to define Tarr's career. A wildly ambitious return to the abandoned project of Satan Tango. 31 years after its 1994 release, Satan Tango stands alone as the great summation of Tarr's work. An exercise in duration that moves to its own hypnotic rhythm. A reckoning with the political system under which he lived half his life that finds cosmic significance in the squalor that envelops its cast of characters. Over 7.5 hours, we follow the interweaving stories of a group of collective farm workers who abandon their homes to follow a menacing cultish figure named Jeremiasz, played by Mihaly Vig, rumoured to have returned from the dead. There is true horror in the film, not least in the sequences involving the disturbed young girl, played with inscrutable intensity by Erika Bock, but also a rich seam of black humour to go with the sheer beauty of Tarr's elegantly unspooling compositions. The film also represented the apotheosis of Tarr's collaboration with Krasznahorkai. The author had based the 1985 novel on his own experiences living and working in Hungary's Great Plain lowlands during the dying days of state-run agriculture. Tarr and his crew spent 2 years traversing the derelict plain to scout locations and to cast locals, an experience that the director credited with forcing him to reimagine his own cinematic language. When I went, he said, I understood the people in his novel in a totally different way from what I had read. I had to develop a new film language, find a new way to film this reality. Tarr's great achievement in Satan Tango is to imbue the hopeless inadequates and agricultural proletarians, in his words, who populated the landscape with a dignity, even while he documented their spiritual decline. Tarr's next film, Werkmeister Harmonies from the year 2000, was another Krasznahorkai adaptation, this time from his 1989 novel, The Melancholy of Resistance. At a mere 2.5 hours, this film is a concentrated and intoxicating evocation of the writer-director duo's philosophy of social collapse. The elliptic plot concerns a holy fool played with wide-eyed naivety by a street musician named Lars Rudolph, whose hometown falls under the spell of a demagogic circus barker known as the Prince, who rides into town with the carcass of a stuffed whale in tow. The film features some of Tarr's most grueling imagery, as well as moments of sincere emotional heft. Werkmeister Harmonies was a troubled production, completed in fits and spurts as funding was found and lost over a 6-year period. The final version has 7 credited cinematographers. Another painful gestation period was to come before Tarr's next feature, the Corsica-set Georges Simenon adaptation, The Man from London, eventually released in 2007. The suicide of the film's producer, Humbert Balzan, just days before shooting began, plunged this international co-production into financial chaos. The final product lacked the feverish intensity of Tarr's most famous works, but it remains a rewarding outlier in his later filmography. A noirish detective story set on the mist-drenched docks of Bastia, in which the narrative intrigue of the source material is swapped for a draining sense of dislocation. Tarr's next feature arrived in his old stomping ground of Berlin in 2011, where it won the Silver Bear for direction. The premiere also came with an announcement from the filmmaker. The Turin Horse was to be his final film. Being a filmmaker is a nice bourgeois job, he explained in 2012. But I really don't want to do it. I'm not a real filmmaker. I've always been in it for the people, and I just wanted to say something about their lives. During these 34 years of filmmaking, I've said everything I want to say. Tarr and his collaborators had refined their style to the limits of their capabilities. Not wanting to rest on their laurels, they walked away. Based on a prose piece by Krasznahorkai rather than a conventional screenplay, The Turin Horse takes as its departure point an apocryphal anecdote about Friedrich Nietzsche, who was said to have suffered a nervous breakdown after witnessing a horse being beaten on the streets of the titular Italian city. Described later by Tarr as a negative creation myth, the film is a paragon of minimalist world-building, covering 6 days in the lives of a father and daughter, played by Tarr faithfuls János Derzsi and Erika Bock, who eke out an existence amidst the howling gales of a deserted plain. This is Tarr at his most simple, and therefore his most profound, operating at the level of a Buddhist koan. We have no choice but to go on living, even though life itself is an impossible task. At this point, Tarr had intended to move into production with the aim of supporting younger filmmakers in Hungary, a plan that was abruptly halted by the obstructive bureaucracy of Viktor Orban's nationalist government. Instead, Tarr decamped to Bosnia, where in 2012 he established Film Factory at the Sarajevo School of Science and Technology. Blending the spirit of his activist past with his latter-day status as an art house luminary, Film Factory was envisioned as a kind of academy where young filmmakers and theorists could interact and learn from Tarr, as well as a host of visiting professors. It was shuttered in 2016 for lack of funds, although many of its graduates have gone on to promising careers, and Tarr himself was an executive producer on the 2021 title Lamb by Valdemar Johansson, one of his former students. A handful of projects have emerged in the years since Film Factory was closed down, most notably short films and multimedia pieces for exhibitions in Amsterdam and Vienna, about migration and homelessness, respectively. But Tarr has receded into the background now of contemporary film discourse, a reference point rather than an active participant. It is more important than ever to look past the bleakness of his work and to the sincere message of hope that underpins all the rain, mud, and alcoholic reverie, and which the director himself beautifully summarised in a recent interview. "If you're really pessimistic," he said, "you go up to the roof and hang yourself. You don't wake up at 4 a.m. and go into the countryside to film. I only ask this: how did you feel when you came out of the movie theatre after watching my film? Did you feel stronger or weaker? That's the main question. I want you to be stronger." That was the Klassiki companion to Béla Tarr, written and read by Sam Goff. You can find this and other essays, companions and watch lists on our journal at klassiki.online/journal. Make sure to check out the links in the show description to find the original piece, to watch Béla Tarr's masterpiece Werkmeister Harmonies on Klassiki, and to explore our full collection of titles from Hungary. And don't forget to subscribe to the show on your podcast app, and please leave us a review and a 5-star rating to help us reach as many people as possible. Thank you.